Tea, 1986. Henry looked up from his paper, smiling as he saw Marty and his fiancée Samantha waving in the window. They entered the tiny storefront cafe. They sat at the base of the Panama Hotel, their entrance ringing with a string of Buddhist bells that jangled from the front door. "Since when did you start hanging out in the Japanese tea houses?" Marty asked, holding out a black wicker chair for Samantha. Henry folded his paper nonchalantly. "I'm a regular." "Since when?" Marty asked, more than surprised. "Since last week." "You must be turning over a whole new tea leaf, then. This is all news to me." Marty turned to Samantha. "Pops would never come here. In fact, he hated coming over to this side of town, pretty much from here to Kobe Park. Outside the new theater, the Nippon Con Theater," Henry corrected. "Right, that place. I used to accuse Pops of being a nippophobe, someone who was afraid of all things Japanese." As he said it, Marty waved his hand in mock fright. "Why?" Samantha asked, in a way that made it seem she thought Marty was joking or teasing. The waitress brought a fresh pot of tea, and Marty refilled his father's cup and poured a cup for Samantha. Henry, in turn, filled Marty's. It was a tradition Henry cherished, never filling your own cup, always filling that of someone else who would return the favor. Pop's pop, my grandfather, was a crazy traditionalist. He was like a Chinese Farrakhan, but he was famous around here. He raised money to fight the Japanese back home. During the whole war in the Pacific, he was helping the war efforts in northern China. It was a big deal back then, huh, Pops? "That is an understatement," Henry said, slurping his tea, holding the small cup with both hands. Growing up, Pops was never allowed in Japantown. It was verboten. If he came home smelling of wasabi, he'd be kicked out of the house or some craziness like that. Samantha looked intrigued. "Is that why you never came here or to Japantown, because of your father?" Henry nodded. It was a different time back then. Around 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed by Congress. No more Chinese were allowed to immigrate. This was when competition for jobs was fierce. Chinese laborers like my father were used for working harder for less, so much so that when the local fisheries added canning machines, those machines were called iron chinks. But still, the local businesses needed cheap labor, so they went around the Exclusion Act. They allowed Japanese workers to come over. Not just workers, but picture brides, too. Japantown flourished while Chinatown remained stagnant. My father resented that. And when Japan invaded China... "But what about afterwards?" she asked. "After you were grown up? After he passed away? Did you feel like all bets were off and you could run wild if you wanted to?" "Man, I would. Being told I can't have something would just drive me crazy, even if I didn't know what to do with it in the first place." Henry looked at his son, who was waiting for an answer to a question he had never asked. "When I was a little boy, most of the International District was Japantown, or Nihonmachi, as they called it then. So it was a big place that my father forbade me to enter. It had Henry searched for the word, a mystique about it. And over the years, much of it changed. At the time, it was illegal to sell property to non-whites, except in certain areas. There was even districts for Italian immigrants, Jewish people, black people. That's just the way it was. So after the Japanese were taken away, all these other people moved in. It was like wanting to go into a certain bar to have a drink, but by the time you were turned 21, the bar turned into a flower shop. It just wasn't the same." "So you didn't want to go?" Marty asked. "After all these years of being told not to, when you finally had your chance, you still didn't want to wander over just to see?" Henry poured more tea for Samantha, furrowing his brow. "Oh, I didn't say that." "But you said it changed." "It did, but I still wanted to go." "Then why didn't you?" "Why now?" Samantha asked. Henry finally pushed his teacup away, drumming his fingers on the glass tabletop. He let out a heavy sigh, one that seemed to reveal a part of him like a curtain drawing back from a darkened stage that was slowly coming to life. "The reason I never went to Nihonmachi is because it was too painful to do so." Henry felt his eyes gloss with wetness, but not quite tears. There was a moment of silence. Another customer left the tea room. The door chimes rang again, breaking the pregnant pause between them. "I don't get it. Why would it be painful if you never went there in the first place, if your father forbade it?" Samantha asked before Marty could. Henry looked at the two of them, so young, so handsome together, but so much they didn't know. "Yes, my father forbade it," he sighed, staring longingly at the framed photos of Nihonmachi hung on the walls. He was vehemently against all things Japanese, even before Pearl Harbor. The war in China had been going on for almost 10 years. But his son, to be frequenting that other part of town, Japantown, would have been bad form. Shameful to him. But oh, how I went. I went anyway, despite him. I went deep into the heart of Nihonmachi. Right here, where we sit now, this was all Japantown. I went and saw many things. In many ways, the best and worst times of my life were spent on this very street. Henry could see the confusion in his son's eyes, more like shock, really. Marty had grown up all these years assuming Henry was like his grandfather, a zealous man, passionate about the old ways and the old country. Someone who harbored enmity toward his neighbors, especially the Japanese ones, clinging to leftover feelings from the war years. It never dawned on his son that Henry's steeped passion for tradition, his stodgy old-world habits, could be for any other reason. "Is this why you invited us here for tea?" Marty asked. The impatience in his voice seemed to soften. "To tell us about Japantown?" Henry nodded yes, then said no, correcting himself. "Actually, I'm glad Samantha asked, because it certainly makes the rest of this easier to explain." "The rest of what?" Marty asked. Henry recognized the look in his son's eyes. It reminded him of the halting, half-spoken conversations he'd had with his own father all those years ago. "I could use your help in the basement." Henry stood up and took out his wallet. He put a $10 bill on the table to cover the tea, then walked up the steps connecting the tea room to the hotel lobby, which was still under renovation. "Are you coming?" "Coming where?" Marty asked. Samantha took his arm and pulled him along, his confusion mirrored by her excitement and anticipation. "I'll explain when we get there," Henry said with a subdued smile. Together they went through the frosted Art Deco doors into the glowing lobby of the Panama Hotel. It smelled of dust and mold, but felt new as Henry touched the brick where it had just been sandblasted and sealed, stripping away decades of chipped paint and dust. Swept and cleaned and swept again. It was just as Henry remembered from when he was a boy, peering through the ornate window. The hotel was the same all over again, as if nothing had changed. Maybe he hadn't changed that much either. Henry, Marty, and Samantha stopped in the makeshift office of the Panama Hotel and waved a hello to Miss Peterson, who was on the phone negotiating with a builder or contractor. She had plans spread across her desk and was discussing details of the renovation. Something about not wanting to change, about wanting to restore the hotel to the way it was. Apparently, buildings like this were either torn down or turned into high-priced condominiums. From the few conversations Henry had had with Miss Pettison, he knew she was having nothing of it. She wanted to restore the Panama Hotel to its former glory, retaining as much of the original architecture as possible. The marble Sento baths, the simple rooms, much the same way she had restored the tea house. Henry signed in, whispering, "We'll be in the basement. I brought help this time," pointing to his son and soon-to-be daughter-in-law. She nodded and waved them on as she kept talking on the phone. Heading down the old stairwell, Marty was getting impatient again. Where exactly are we going, Pops?" Henry kept telling him, "Wait and see, wait and see." Through the heavy rust-hinged door, Henry led them into the basement storage room. He flipped the light switch, and the makeshift string of utility lights crackled to life. "What is this place?" Samantha asked, running her hands along the dusty stacks of suitcases and old boxes. "This is a museum, I think. It just doesn't know it yet. Right now it's sort of a time capsule from before you were born," Henry said. "During the war, the Japanese community was evacuated for their own safety, supposedly. They were given only a few days' notice and were forced inland to internment camps. A senator at the time, I think he was from Idaho, called them concentration camps. They weren't that bad, but it changed the lives of many. People had to leave everything behind. They could only take 2 suitcases each and one small sea bag, like a duffel bag." Henry approximated the size with his hands. "So they stored their valuable belongings in places like this hotel, the basements of churches or with friends. What was left in their homes was long gone by the time they returned. Looters took everything, but most didn't return anyway." "And you saw all this, didn't you, when you were a boy?" Marty asked. "I lived it," Henry said. "My father was for the evacuation. He was excited about E-Day, as many called it. I didn't understand it completely, but I was caught in the middle of everything. I saw it all happen." "So that's why you never came back to Japantown? Just too many bad memories?" Marty asked. "Something like that," Henry said. "In a way, there was nothing for me to come back to. It was all gone." "But I don't get it. Why is this stuff still here?" Samantha asked. "This hotel was boarded up with the rest of Japantown. The owner himself was taken away. People lost everything. Japanese banks closed. Most people didn't come back. I think the hotel changed owners a few times, but it stayed boarded up all these years, decades in fact. Miss Pettison bought it and found all of this still here, unclaimed." "There's no one left alive?" 40 years is a long time. People have moved on or passed on, I'm afraid. They looked at the stacks of luggage in silence. Samantha touched the thick cloak of dust in the cracked leather steamer trunk.